What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And I noticed a lot of new folks have been coming around the channel, and so welcome, of course. Let me make a really quick point around the content, right? And then we'll get into this conversation on the Bulldogs. I talk about prison, I talk about gangs, I talk about crime, because that's all part of my experience. But I also talk about a lot of other things, from mental health to interviews with people, politics, religion, addiction, finances, just relationships, parenting, legal work, the whole nine. Because I believe we are more than just our experiences on the block and behind the wall. And so I try to bring that out. And maybe you're just here for the prison content. You're like, hey, homie, miss me with all this stuff. I don't care. I want war stories. Cool. Tons of content, have fun. But if you're into other stuff, I encourage you to look around also, right? Because there's a wide range of things, right? It's inclusive. So with that said, let's get on to the topic, the Bulldogs. A topic in a group I don't speak on very often because I don't have a lot of personal experience with them. By the time I came to prison in 96, the whole Norteños and Bulldogs thing, that split was well established, right? It was set in stone. So I didn't encounter them on the yards or anything like that, with very, very rare exception, and there was still no real interaction. And so I tend not to address it except for in the case of things that happen in prison, right? And different stuff with CDC and integration and everything, because those things I do follow closely, not for the Bulldogs, just in general. And it's an interesting group, right? Regardless of if you ever rock with them, you hate them, you like them, you are a Bulldog, like wherever you fall, you could care less. Uh, you can't deny that they're not an interesting group, right? With the interesting history in terms of the unique place that they've carved out, right? Both within California prison politics and just kind of street gang politics in terms of raza and north south. And so it's a trip, right? If nothing else, it's a trip. And they've been at it with CDC, and CDC's been at it with them for a long time in different ways. Uh, as a lot of you guys know, this whole integration policy, kind of as a response to emptying out the shoes and the end of hostilities and signs that the end of hostilities was actually working in the sense that these groups that are traditionally at war were not going to war with each other. CDC said, cool, you know what? We're going to throw everybody together, right? And make these 50-50 yards, which is an odd name. It's really not 50-50 nothing, but that's what they called it. And everybody said it's never going to work, right? I long before I was on YouTube, you could find statements of mine in other media, newspapers and news accounts, radio stations, very much against it, very much against the integration. I felt like it was a setup for people to catch more time and to get hurt, that it was a solution without a problem. You know what I mean? Let the SNY cats do their thing on their yards. Let the general population folks do their thing on their yards. Like, why you got to mix them? It ain't broke. And I still think it was a setup, to be honest. However, it's largely worked, I think, in terms of from CDC's point of view. There was a lot of talk earlier on, oh, it might work on level one zones, but not on these other yards. Not these other yards. We ain't going for it. Now, if you've done time in California, especially if you're doing time in the 90s, you've heard this before, right? You've heard this whole, it'll never happen. And it happens. They'll never take the weights. If they take the weights, we're going to kick it off. I was there. They took the weights, right? Grooming standards. Nobody talks about grooming standards. You got to cut your hair, mustaches. Nah, man, if that happens, we're going to kick it off. It didn't happen, right? It happened, and the kickoff, they fumbled. It didn't work, right? Taking away night yard, taking away family visits from lifers was a big one. Changing the way packages are, like just all this different stuff, taking away tobacco and lighters. And so there's always this talk of, man, that'll never fly. But CDC plays a long game, man, and it winds up working, and that's a whole nother conversation perhaps in itself. So this is kind of work. You do have some yards where that 50-50 thing ain't happening. And cool. Shout out to them. And you have a lot of 50-50 yards. And cool, shout out to them too. If you're surviving in prison, congratulations. I hope you continue to until you get out one day, unless you're a weirdo, right? But the Bulldogs have been a problem. And this is about the Bulldogs, although I will say there's a small group, really small group of people who can program with Bulldogs that don't fall up under the traditional leadership of these prison organizations, these prison gangs. So they're no good. They're not welcome in those arenas. But they also wouldn't go to a 50-50 yard or lock it up or SNY or anything else. They're general population. They just don't subscribe to leadership. And so they're kind of in the same boat too. But again, it's a small group. So, and they rock with Bulldogs. So with the Bulldogs, CDC said, we're going to force you, right? You're going to have to get along. And they sent them to a bunch of different prisons. And there was bloodshed a lot of times, right? None of this has been without bloodshed. So I don't mean to undermine the sacrifices and the expenses that occurred because of folks being put together. You know what I mean? So these folks, the Bulldogs, they get sent to all these different places. And there's different rumors that go, oh, they won't go on the yard, or they got locked it up, or CTQ'd, or this or that. And what's true and what's not in a lot of those, I don't know, man. What I do know is in some places they went, they came outside and they got dealt with, right? And then other times they had the upper hand and went outside and they did the dealing, right? They were the dealer. It kind of went both ways, right? It's not an issue of who's tough or who's with the business. You're talking about a bunch of oftentimes level 4 convicts with blood on their hands that everybody wants to survive. And if I know that you want to kill me, you'd be amazed what I could do to try to make sure I stay alive. It's just how it goes, right? And that doesn't matter what you rock with. So they sent them to all these places. They're like, we're going to force it. Well, here's the update. They're all coming back. They're all being brought, right? They're all being brought back to the places in which they were sent out from, because it's not a good look. It's not happening. Now, there's been conversations, right? There's been, particularly on the end of the North, there's been some double talk, right? Hey, we're kind of open to the possibility of a conversation of seeing if this whole brown pride thing can perhaps extend to you, brown vatos too. Which is a two-way conversation. It's not just a matter of one group allowing the other on the yard. The other has to be willing to go on the yard and not take flight too, right? So it's a two-way street. But in the midst of those talks, there's also bloodshed happening in other places up under the leadership of the same people in those conversations. So like, hey, me and you are talking. Is there a space? Is there a way in which we can coexist in the same facility without violence? Meanwhile, my homeboys are whacking your homeboys at another prison. That kind of, that's not good faith negotiation, right? So there's skepticism and there's hatred, between these groups and a ton of distrust. So it just hasn't worked, right? And I heard a story, a while back, amusing, but also just kind of show this divide within CDC. You had a Bulldog from Salinas Valley, and they were like, hey, if we're going to Lancaster, we're going to send you to Lancaster. So they send him. He gets to Lancaster, and in R&R, they're like, hey, no, pump the brakes, right? Stop. You're not going to stay here. You're going right back to Salinas. And literally brought a van, right? Didn't put him in a hole to wait for another bus going in that direction. None of that. Left him in his little holding spot in R&R, called for a van, right? Uber, here comes a van, threw in a van, drove his ass to his property right back to this valley. Here you go, right? Which shows that, and I don't know the inner workings of the politics within CDC, the government agency, right? So apparently Sacramento's pushing a line. It seems to me Sacramento's pushing a line, but the wardens and the administrators of these different prisons are like, nah, fool, not on my watch, not in my backyard. I don't want this headache. These fools are all crazy. They're all going to try to kill each other, right? And it's just not going to happen. And that's not because the Bulldogs running around saying, we won't program. Like, they pull up, they show up, they go where they're told to go, and what happens, right? Good, bad, or otherwise. So they're all being sent back, Now, these dudes, obviously, they're not on a traditional general population yard, right? The kind of yard where north and south are hanging out, and they're not on those yards, right? Because of the leadership on those yards, they're not welcome, vice versa. So they have their own little unique yards. What's going to happen there? Right now, there's been talk of integrating, like at Salinas, they've talked about integrating that whole yard, right? The C upper, C lower, put them together. But CDC, the prison is like, no, it's not going to happen, right? There's been conversations. Hey, can you guys come sit down and talk about? Yeah, let's go. Can you guys come sit down and talk about? Yeah, let's go. They talk, nothing really comes of it. Then sometimes it's, hey, will you guys come and talk? So the Bulldogs go, yeah, let's go. And then the folks on the other side of the yard, nah, we ain't got nothing to talk about. Okay, well, that sends a message. Your failure to sit down says a lot, right? But nonetheless, it's been a mess. And I think a lesson has been learned, right? Now, who does this benefit is a whole nother story. These transfers that have happened, right? So in talking to some folks, these dudes that get sent to these other prisons, the Bay, wherever it may be, and they don't get a chance to program, well, where they're at, they're programming, right? They got their A2B status. They have a job where they're in school. They go to yard all the time. They do all this. They have a blast. They're living their life on the yard just like anybody else in a general population environment, right? With all the privileges and incentives of their mainline status. Go look that up. But when they get transferred, you lose all that, right? You lose your job, you lose your position in school, whatever. So then you got to come back and start from square one, right? You might lose your pay number. Now everything restarts. So that dude that went to Lancaster, he came back. He can't go full draw to canteen. He can't. He has to wait. He has to get on the list and find another spot. And so it's a real disruption to the program. And if you've done time, that routine is everything, right? You get your routine is set. You don't want to mess that up, right? And CDC is coming and throwing off these routines like crazy. So it does come with consequence. It comes with stress to the family. You go to these prisons, you can't program there, right? So you go to the hole, you don't get to go to the yard, or you go to this section, but you're on lockdown or whatever. Now they're talking about sending folks somewhere. I won't get into the details, but having a split program, right? We're okay, we're going to send you guys and then we'll run. But they don't have a split program now. Right now they have normal program, right? So it's still taking an L, you know what I mean? And so folks aren't happy about it. I don't know who gets the most credit in this. Is it the wardens of these prisons? Maybe credit's not the right word, but is it the wardens and the administrators at these individual prisons who say, hey, fool, enough is enough? It's a bad look. It's bad publicity. It's bad press to have all this violence. I don't want it in my prison. I don't want people looking at me, right? It's a lot of work. One of the CEOs are like, damn, fool, we're good. Like, we don't want this issue, right? It's more of a headache for us. We don't want it. And there's little posturing or leverage within prisons. Is it the families and the loved ones? I know I talked to Renee from We Are Their Voices, and I've had conversations with other people, these huge networks of loved ones in communities who their loved ones rock with whoever. I mean, they don't care. They're the women, the kids, the families, right? They don't give a shit what they claim or what their track record is. They just want their loved one to come home or to be able to do their time in relative safety. So they have put a lot of political pressure. Maybe that's kind of what's gotten the attention. Maybe it's the folks in the mix themselves, right? Maybe it's just those that go out there with knives in their hands and either take shots or give shots, right? On all sides. I don't know. But definitely the idea of how this was gonna go, the picture CDC presented in this instance of it ain't never gonna happen, we're seeing it's not gonna happen. Right now, never is a strong word. But in all the talk of this won't, that won't, that'll never go down, that'll never go down. If you've been watching and if you're a little bit older, a lot of stuff has happened in prison in recent years that nobody thought would ever happen. And a lot of it's good, right? I'm not. That's not a critique. It's just an acknowledgement. Times are changing, but this is like, set in a time capsule, right? North don't rock with Bulldogs, South don't rock with Bulldogs, Bulldogs don't rock with either one. That's not going to change. I hope that does change at some point. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not in the mix. Nobody's asking my opinion in terms of those who are in the mix. Um, so who knows, right? It's that's not my journey anymore. But as an outside person, I would like to see that resolved somehow. And actually, that's going to be a video coming up later on this week. So, anyways, there you have it. The Bulldogs are coming back, right? Wherever they got shipped to, they're coming back. There was no gaining any yards or any of that kind of stuff. Now, they lost some places because of being transferred, right? And what is that going to look like? We'll see. But I would not expect it to look like CDC putting them on a yard, like go fight and get your yard back. I think they're going to pave the way for them. And I hear some folks like, oh, it's favoritism towards them. Why they cut them slack? It's not I don't see it that way. It's not a cutting of slack. It's an acknowledgement that bloodshed is going to occur on both sides, right? People are going to get hurt on both sides. And again, as somebody who no longer, is in this mix, I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, right? I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I want to see folks be able to program, do their time, and hopefully come home again, unless you're a weirdo. Anyways, help others move in excellence, man. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community. And again, tap in with me offline. Instagram, The Homie Hangout. Facebook, The Homie Hangout. Email Joshua at The Homie Hangout. The comments, whatever. Smoke signals. You know what I mean? And let me know what you guys think, man, and what you're looking at. What's catching your attention? What questions do you have? And I'll be happy to get into it to the best that I can. Have a good one.